American neutrality, specifically looking at the Great War. So as much as America tried to be neutral, we've already seen that their attitudes regarding World War I, they weren't completely neutral. We're going to see this trend is going to continue with things like economics. So international law at this time permitted neutral nations, such as the United States, to ship or sell war material to belligerent nations. So we could sell to both sides in this conflict. And this is a big deal because there was actually a recession when the war began. And so a lot of Americans hoped that war orders would actually spur an economic recovery. And actually, it did indeed do this. It did help pull America out of a recession. However, as much as America was allowed to trade with both sides, the British Navy is going to block trade with the Central Powers. So really, we're seeing the Allied side buys a lot more American goods. Now, there was a concern here that this, undermines American neutrality at this time, and Congress even thought about for a time having an embargo against munitions, but very few Americans supported it because they wanted to benefit economically from selling munitions to both sides if at all possible. But what happens really is over time, this is meaning that America is trading a whole lot more with the Allies and strengthening their ties with the Allied powers, but basically embittering Germany against America. And it's not even just items. We're going to see the Allies are going to borrow money from the United States banks to help fund the war. Now, initially, William Jennings Bryan is actually going to convince Woodrow Wilson to prohibit loans to belligerent nations because it's not really consistent with the whole spirit of neutrality. The moment you are loaning someone money, you want them to win the battle so that they pay you back. But basically, with the importance of war orders on the American economy, Woodrow Wilson's going to end up ending this ban. And so when we look at financial ties, by April of 1917, loans to the Allied nations are going to exceed $2 billion, which is nearly 100 times more money than America lent to Germany. And so this is really underwriting America's neutrality. And then there's the issue of diplomacy. We get this same imbalance of America trying to be neutral, but not really being neutral. So the thing is, we're going to see Wilson is going to insist on American neutral rights, but basically the British are going to violate those rights pretty often, and America is going to acquiesce to that. Whereas Wilson will not yield when Germany violates those neutral rights. Now, to be fair, it can be argued that British violations of these rights basically cost Americans like property, it costed them markets, it costed them time, whereas German violations did actually cost American lives. Still, we do have an imbalance here. So the thing is, at the beginning of the Great War, America's going to ask all the belligerent nations to respect the 1909 Declaration of London when it came to neutral rights. Germany actually agreed to this. Great Britain, on the other hand, refused. Great Britain is going to blockade Germany, mine the North Sea, and basically force neutral ships into British ports where they would search their cargoes and confiscate material that they say was useful to the German war effort. All of this is infringing on United States trading rights as a neutral party. We should have been allowed to trade with Germany, and we shouldn't have, had our ships forced seizure of items and everything. So Wilson is going to brand Britain's blockade as it's illegal, it's unwarranted, but he basically concedes on these neutral rights because he wanted to avoid any kind of conflict with Great Britain. The thing is, Great Britain wasn't just taking munitions from these kinds of ships, Britain was prohibiting even food and other products that Germany would have imported during peacetime from reaching Germany. So the German response to all of this was submarine warfare. Basically, this means that neutral ships are going to risk being sunk because Germany is going to use submarines against Allied shipping in the war zone all around the British Isles. The other reason neutral ships risk being sunk is because the British ships illegally would fly neutral flags. And then there's the issue of submarine warfare itself. The thing is, submarines can't follow traditional rules of naval warfare. So first of all, when you are having naval warfare up to this point, there's no such thing as a surprise attack. You see the other ship coming, generally speaking, and it's very much, you can prepare, you might try to outmaneuver them and everything, but there's no such thing as a surprise attack, whereas submarines basically depend exactly on that. The other thing is, generally, when it comes to naval warfare up to this point, what happens is one ship sinks the other, and basically they would take aboard all of the people who had been on that ship and take them as prisoners. But submarines are basically too small to rescue victims when they sink the ships, and so instead those people just die. So Wilson is going to refuse to see the imperative necessity of Germany's tactics. We're going to see things like in May of 1915, German submarine is going to actually sink the British passenger line, the Lusitania. The thing is, the Lusitania was like carrying some armaments and such, and the German embassy had actually warned Americans specifically, like, don't travel on this ship. If you're traveling on this ship, like, we will shoot at it if we see it and everything like that. And the loss of life here is going to be about 1,200 people, and 128 of those passengers were Americans. It's really interesting. If you ever get a chance to look at the Lusitania, it is so much luck on the submarine actually hitting the Lusitania and sinking it. It was one of those things, they actually just happened upon the Lusitania. It was luck there. And then on top of that, they tried to shoot for like the very middle of the Lusitania, and it turned towards the torpedo basically. And so it basically hit the ship in the worst place possible, meaning that it sunk faster than if it had been like hit anywhere else, which meant that there was less time for people to get out and less time for like rescue ships to get there and everything like that. It's really nuts. What's even more nuts is that you can actually find there were some people that were on the Lusitania that survived, that also survived the sinking of the Titanic. So it's really crazy when you look at it. Fascinating information if you ever get a chance to read more into it. So the thing is, we've got the sinking of the Lusitania, Americans have died, so America is condemning Germany. Still, even with this, only it's like 6 out of 1,000 editorials in the United States are calling for war. Most people still opposed America getting involved in the war. But it does put Woodrow Wilson in a difficult stance. He has to be strong against Germany, but he doesn't want to get involved. So Wilson is going to demand Germany abandon their submarine warfare. He's actually harsh enough against Germany in particular that William Jennings Bryan, who was really neutral in all of this, he's going to actually resign his position. The thing is, William Jennings Bryan recognized that on some level, Great Britain was actually using American passengers on their ships basically as a shield to try to protect their contraband cargo. And so William Jennings Bryan actually proposed like Americans shouldn't travel on belligerent ships. And this is actually supported across many parts of the United States. The thing is, there's no kind of law or tradition that gave Americans the right to travel safely on belligerent ships during wartime. And so the fact that Wilson tried to assure that Americans had such a right basically meant that he's committing to a policy that is going to mean he's going to come in conflict with Germany. So we're going to see arguments are going to climax, and then in April of 1916, Germany they're going to have a submarine that torpedoes a French ship, the Sussex, that you can see pictured here, and this injures 4 Americans. At this point, Wilson's going to threaten to break diplomatic relations if Germany doesn't abandon their unrestricted submarine warfare against all merchant vessels, enemy and neutral. Basically, this threat implied war. So at this point, Germany is going to promise, fine, they are going to make the Sussex Pledge. And in this promise, they promise not to sink merchant ships without warning. However, also as a part of that pledge, they required Britain to adhere to the rules of international law that were made before the war. So on one hand, this is a diplomatic victory for the United States. They get what they want, that Germany is going to stop, except for it's a hollow victory because peace basically depended on the British adopting a course that they had already rejected by this point. So, looking at all of this so far, and what you know about World War I at this point, do you think America should get involved?